First of all, thank you so much for being with us. Good to see you. I would like to ask you about the geopolitical situation, which is complicated, obviously. You have mentioned in one of your previous interviews that the deterrence policy has failed and it's not working anymore. Then how do you see an alternative? And of course, I mean the deterrence policy towards Russia, which is the most important for Europe, considering the war in Ukraine, but a lot of things that Vladimir Putin is doing. So what is an alternative policy, in your opinion?
The alternative policy is to have real deterrence, and that can be a mixture of deterrence by denial, just making it much more difficult for other countries to attack us, and also making them feel that if they do attack us, the penalties are really severe. So we still have the problems of sabotage, for example. We read today in the Financial Times about the way in which Russian GRU agents have been attacking the Bulgarian arms industry to try and interfere with arms deliveries to Ukraine. And nothing's really been done about it. There have been no real prosecutions. Nobody's been sent to jail. Nobody's been deported. So that's just one example. But I think that deterrence covers everything from full-scale armed attack, which thank goodness we have not had against NATO, that we have had against Ukraine, right through to this sort of grey zone attack. And it's in this area that deterrence has been really, really lacking.
I would like to understand, I mean, who has made the mistake? And right now I'm talking about the Western policy, and this failure, it comes from the West. What is wrong with the decision-making process? How would you answer?
I think we assumed in 1991 that we weren't going to be attacked, and that was why almost all European countries, with a very small number of exceptions, notably Finland, just dismantled their Cold War era protections against subversion, psychological warfare, disinformation, sabotage, all these other sort of what the old KGB used to call активные мероприятия, active measures. And we also failed to realize that technology and globalization created a whole new range of vectors of attack. And so we didn't really think about dirty money and how that could be used as a geopolitical weapon. And we didn't really think through the implications of making the internet the central nervous system of our civilization, when the internet wasn't really designed to be secure. So the good thing is that we did these things not because we were made to, not because the other side was stronger. We did these things because we were naive and sometimes lazy and quite often greedy. And the good thing about this is if we stop being naive and greedy and lazy, we can get our act together and we can make it much harder for people to attack us with dirty money. We can do a lot more on cybersecurity. We can do a lot more on subversion, and we can do a lot more across the whole range of grey zone aggression.
Yeah, but right now it doesn't seem to have, the West doesn't seem to have this unity. Yes, there is a chance to, to start deterrence as you describe it, but on this stage of history, we can see that the mood in Washington, in European Union, is different from what it was when the war has started, when the big invasion started, and we can see that there are so many articles and publications that say that there is this fatigue in Washington. There are people who are actually pushing Ukraine to the negotiation table. We are not sure about that. We don't have it as a fact, but we read this op-eds and then articles and so on and so forth. What is going on right now? How would you describe this particular issue with unity and negotiations with Russia?
I don't think there's no unity, and I think that the response of the European Union to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has exceeded many people's expectations, and there's also been strong transatlantic unity. It was only a few years ago that President Macron was saying that NATO was brain dead. I don't think anyone would say that now. Has it been enough? No, it hasn't. But I think Putin's assumption that the West was fundamentally weak and would splinter under pressure has proved to be wrong. I think when it comes to deterrence, which was what you were asking me about before, I think that this is mainly the responsibility of national governments at the moment, particularly this sort of grey zone deterrence against the grey zone attacks, because they tend to be in the areas of activity which are the competence of national governments: financial regulation, criminal justice system, media regulation, broadcasting regulation, and so on. So I think that that's where we should expect the response. And I think it's the international response could be better, but that's neither a necessary nor sufficient condition at this stage for establishing proper grey zone deterrence. Finland is the best example here. Finland has got very strong grey zone deterrence. It makes it very difficult for other countries to attack. And when Russia does attack or do something inside Finland that the Finnish authorities don't like, Finland responds very effectively, as we saw in the case of the Ääriston-Helmi raid a few years ago. Now, it didn't stop Finland doing this, that it wasn't in NATO. It didn't help Finland do this, that it was in the EU. They just gone on and did it. So I think if one's talking about deterrence, the buck stops really with national governments at this stage.
And the second part of my question was about pushing Ukraine to the negotiation table with Russia. Do you think that this is really happening?
I think that it's a mistake to say there's a negotiating table, because I don't think Putin shows any sign of wanting to negotiate. He doesn't believe Ukraine should exist as a country, and his demands on the geopolitical front are far wider than just Ukraine. Before the war in Ukraine, he also issued demands for a withdrawal of all outside NATO forces from the new member states. He basically wants to end the transatlantic alliance and to create a new European security order in which Russia has a veto over what happens in neighbouring countries. And I hope that's profoundly unacceptable. So I think that it's a bit like asking is there a negotiating table for the Middle East settlement? You can have a table. It doesn't mean that either side wants to come to it.
So you roll out the possible talks, because I mean I agree totally that Vladimir Putin and others from Kremlin, they do not see Ukraine as a state at all, but still officially they are saying that they are ready for negotiations, but I cannot even imagine what they can talk about.
Well, I think you actually get negotiations when both sides are in a mutually hurting stalemate, and when neither side feels that it can get what it wants militarily. That was the case with the Northern Ireland conflict in my own country, Britain, where the IRA realised it couldn't win, and the British side realised it would never be able to defeat the IRA completely. And so that mutual understanding was the basis for the long and painful process that ended in the Good Friday Agreement and the demilitarization of the military, of what was fundamentally a political dispute about the future of that part of Ireland. And I don't think we're anywhere near this at the moment. I don't think the Ukrainians are going to lose. I haven't ruled out that the Russians could lose. It depends very much on how much support the West is willing to give them. So I think Western countries should reflect very carefully on the sacrifices that Ukraine has made and the cost, partly in quantity, but even more in the quality of weapons that we're sending. And we could do that rather than hypothetical peace talks, because I just don't see at the moment any overlap between what Russia wants and what Ukraine wants.
The last question I was wondering about is, when you talk about the real deterrence, do you think that it can lead the world, the Western countries, the NATO alliance, to the war with Russian Federation, the real war with Russia?
I think whenever you have a political conflict, you've always got to ask yourself how far you're prepared to go in defense of your political objectives. And in the conflict between Russia and the West, which has, I would argue, been going on for a long time. Russia does have a nuclear arsenal, and Russia has said that it will use it if it faces an existential threat. And the definition of that threat is a definition in Russia, not in the West. So long as we see a nuclear-armed Russia with hostile intentions, we have to be mentally prepared to go to war in order to defend our interests and those of our allies. That doesn't mean that we will go to war. And in fact, I would argue that the willingness to go to war is actually the best guarantee of peace, because it removes the element of uncertainty. If Russia thinks that the West is not willing to defend itself, then it's tempting for Russia to use military force or other kinds of force. If Russia is absolutely convinced that the West is willing to use military force to defend its freedom and the freedom of its allies, then that option's pretty much closed off for Russia, because Russia's not strong enough to take on the West. So as the old Romans said, if you want peace, prepare for war, and that way you get peace. If you don't prepare for war, you won't have peace. You won't have peace, and you will have war.
But do you think there are some red flags, the red lines for the West when there is a serious conversation about the real confrontation on the ground with Russian army?
I don't think that the talk of red lines is at all helpful, because if you say this is a red line, then you're saying anything up to the red line is okay, and I don't think it's a sensible way of behaving. It's not the way we behave in real life if we're dealing with neighbours or with our business rivals or with anyone else we have dealings with. We don't have this sort of binary. This is not okay, and I'll punch you, and anything short of that I will accept. We have graduated responses to things we don't like, and we speak politely, then we speak firmly, then we may go to court or invoke the authorities or whatever. And I think international relations are the same. It's a calculus, a slope between friendly disagreement, unfriendly disagreement, and then more emphatic expressions of displeasure. But the key thing is to maintain an active policy where you say, this is what we want, we're trying to make it happen, and we'll continue trying to make it happen, and use all the means in our power to do that. And that is true whether it's arming Ukraine and helping Ukraine win, or defending our society against the grey zone aggression. But what we shouldn't do is sit there and let the Russians come right up to the red line and then put one foot over it and test us to see what happens. That's inviting disaster.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lucas. I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope to see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine.
Excellent question.
Thank you. Thank you very much.